Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Diana White, Director of Programs and Events at the PGA. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome you to this Q&A today with the creator, showrunner, executive producer, and writer of Shining Girls, Silka Luisa. Before we get started, we'd like to say a quick thank you to Apple TV Plus for making today's panel possible. Leading this conversation today is Kristen Lopez, who has been an entertainment writer and film critic for 12 years. Her work has been published on Forbes, MTV, and The Hollywood Reporter, amongst many other places. Kristen, thank you so much for being here, and I will turn it over to you to take it away.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to get to be talking about this wonderful series that just when I think I can't be surprised by where things go, it goes in a completely different direction, and I'm more surprised. So I am thrilled to get to talk to you, Silka, about the show. The question I wanted to kick things off with, it's a generic one. I'm sure you've heard it a million times, but can you talk a little bit about what drew you to the book, why you wanted to translate that into a TV show?
So I actually read the book when it came out. I love all things genre, and it's exactly the kind of thing I read. And it really stayed with me. So it felt like something I hadn't seen the blend of genres before. I thought Lauren had done this incredible job of sort of introducing sci-fi into a serial killer story in a really character-driven way that I hadn't seen. But I think more so than that, it was really giving voice to the victims, and the fact that so much of the book was from their point of view. And it felt like that was really original. And, Kirby in particular, she felt like just like a character I hadn't seen in this kind of story where, she had agency, she was driving forward, but at the same time, she was vulnerable and she was dealing with the trauma of what happened to her in a very real way. And so that collection of the original concepts all blended together was, something I was like, this is really, really special. And so it stayed with me. And then, anytime I kept working in the genre space, I worked on other TV shows, and people would always be like, what kind of stuff do you like? And I would use that as the example, whereas like, if you have any books that are like this, that's what I want to find. And then I knew they had been developing it as a feature for a long time, which, as a feature, I think that part of what was challenging was just getting it all into a 2-hour format. And so they were becoming more open to having it be a TV show. And once I heard that, I went in, had a take, and very aggressively went after the gig.
Well, considering that they were looking at this for a feature, can you talk a little bit about what your take was? I mean, was this a hard sell to kind of, once they're already looking at doing it as a TV show, what was your entry point to sell them on letting you helm this story?
Well, I think there was 2 elements that were different than the book, that are the biggest translation from book to TV. One was just anchoring it more fully in Kirby's point of view. So the book it's a 50-50 split more so. And for me, since she was the character that I really connected with, I was like, I just want to be with her. And also for a mystery, it's obviously, if it's really, really subjective, that makes the mystery beats a lot easier to tell because you're not seeing the whole story. The problem was once I switched it to just Kirby's point of view, you lose a lot of the sci-fi elements. Right? So if you're not with Harper, you don't see the time travel, you don't see all the genre stuff that I loved in the book. So I was like, well, how am I going to stay with Kirby and get the sci-fi? And so that's where the idea for the shifting reality came in. And the concept that, even though he's in different time periods doing these violent acts, they're kind of tethered to each other and his actions can impact her. And for me, that once I had that idea, I was like, oh, that's perfect. That feels like such a great metaphor for trauma, which is what the book is all about. All these years later, you think you have moved past what's happened to you. You think you've untethered yourself from this person. And the reality is you haven't. There's this invisible thread sort of linking you, and you just need to figure out how to cut the rope.
Well, and with an adaptation, there's this erroneous belief that a book makes it easier, right? Because you have this guide where you have everything's laid out for you, the story beats are there. Of course, we know that you made changes to the narrative, structure, but what was it like to adapt this to an 8-episode series? What was the process like?
It is, you do have so much there, and you have a world and you have a place to start. So all of that is for sure easier. But you also have this emotional element, which is, I just really love the book. And so I really didn't want to let Lauren down. I wanted her to feel like, the final product is consistent with what she was trying to put out into the world and what her worldview was. So you are walking a razor's edge where, what are the elements I can change to make it structurally work for a TV show without completely undoing what makes the book so special. And so I think that was the first piece, where it was like making sure I really understood the themes of the book and what the book was trying to say, and always keeping those center. You just need more characters, and all the characters have to have more life to them so that they can fill out more hours. And so but you have a whole writer's room, and that's the fun part, because now you get to build out the newsroom, you get to build out Harper, you get to build out his backstory. Like all that it's like you start with the idea of what's in the book, and then you build all these layers behind it. So that part was really, really fun.
Was this a series? I know that some creatives, when they have a book, they have certain beats or certain one thing that they really do from the book that they wanted to include in the series. Was there something similar with this, that certain beats or a thing that you really wanted to make sure that had to be included from the book?
There's definitely certain scenes. So the show opens the same way the book opens, because I liked that she started the book being like, this is the guy. This is the guy we're following. There's no question about it. It's not, who's the murderer, it's him. And the whole, you're sort of exploring like who he is, how he does it, and all of that. So I started in the same way. That felt like a really important anchor point. There's the radium dance in episode 6. I loved that from the book. So I was just like, that's
such a great moment.
I know. And it was so vivid, and it was so like in my mind. So that we spent a lot of time, like the costume, the choreography, we made the music for, just getting that right was really, really important to me. Some fundamentals about the book, some mechanisms that I thought she had done a great job. Just the simple idea that it's the house that he uses to time travel. So instead of it being this kind of very, complicated, elaborate, it's really just a physical space. It's like a totem of power, and anybody can find it, anybody can use it. That to me was very clean and really interesting, because it makes it more about who Harper is as opposed to something making him who he is. So that was important to keep for me.
Well, Harper is an interesting character from the minute we meet him. That opening scene that you talk about, this is many people on social media. We know Jamie Bell for, Billy Elliot playing nice guys. It's definitely not a nice character. And I know he talked about wanting to avoid glamorizing or making the character charming, too charming, or too, in a way that people would be like, oh, well, kind of make excuses for him. I'm curious how you saw the Harper character, and was that a similar mentality you had, or how did you see his character?
Yeah, as somebody who loves serial killer genre, I was very, very cautious about stepping into that space, just because I wanted Kirby to be the most interesting character in the show and not him. And actually having the house just be existing. So like, he's not a time traveler that figured out how time works, and he's this master genius, and he has all the answers. He just got given the golden egg, and that already took a lot off of him as a character. but it was really important that he, especially once you see his backstory, that you understand this is just a small, insecure man that has been given this great gift. And this is what he uses it for, is to make himself feel stronger and more powerful than women that make him feel small. At the same time, when we were casting, it's just, there was that scene in the pilot where he talks to Jin Suk. If he's so creepy, you can't have scenes, right? Like no one is going to talk to that guy. And in a way, it becomes so much more scary. It becomes scarier because this is somebody you might give 5 minutes to. This is somebody you might grab a drink with because he is unassuming. He doesn't seem threatening. He's somebody you'd let in your life, and he feels like somebody you might know. And to me, that was really important, where he's not exceptional. He's not a master genius. He doesn't, his backstory is pretty simple. And he's not so unappealing that he can't actually exist. He can't just be a phantom. Because if he was so creepy, you would just put him outside the window and that would just be it.
Well, it almost seems like a chicken or egg scenario. Jamie talked about his physicality. He's not technically a very physically intimidating type of person, but which is a contrast to the character in the book, who is more slick backed hair and very charming. Was it a process of kind of tweaking the character once Jamie was cast, or was the character already that way and Jamie just inhabited it?
The character was very much already that way, and that, I knew, just as a woman, if you're alone in a space with somebody that they have a certain, intimidating presence, you immediately, your alarm bells go off, the hair on the back, you start to look for exits. And so we couldn't really cast somebody that had that energy to them. The first time the audition was on Zoom. So I had never seen, so much of when you see the person in person, obviously, more, but I think that it's not really necessarily his physicality. He brings a vulnerability to it. He has a boyishness to him. Like there's a playfulness and all of those things. He's just really charming. And so that you feel safe. Like even when we were having our conversation afterwards, he's just somebody that you feel like, oh yeah, I can be alone with him. He's not going to do anything to me. But then he can turn it really, really quickly. And just in his performance, you can see the switch. And I think that the contrast and how easily he can play both levels is really what has, I think people have been really responsive to his performance in it.
Yeah, the show has been generating a lot of really amazing conversation. I know that people have been we talk about genre, but really watching Elisabeth's performance, there's been a lot of talk about the concept of women, hindsight. If you could be able to travel back and forth and kind of relive those moments and confront an attacker in that way, what would you do? For you, what has it been like to see the conversation, especially in the world outside? Women, we haven't been having a great time of it, in the world. It's gotten a little bit worse lately. How has it been to see the response to this going beyond genre and really having women discuss the nuances of the series?
It's been one of the most gratifying, unexpected parts of the process. I'm not active on the internet. Like I had to learn how to search hashtags on Twitter. I'm not it's been a whole new world. But to actually see, so many, the whole process is I've worked on this for 5 years. Everybody gives you notes. You do share it with people, but it's, executives and people working on it. And it's a very select group. So to have actual, the people that you made the show for react to it and connect with it. And I think from women, what's been, even if women haven't had Kirby's experience, it hasn't been that, dramatic. What I'm hearing the most is that there is this constant anxiety all the time, and that we live with this quiet hum of fear And we've just all learned how to deal with it. Like when you come off the subway, when you are in a room by yourself, when you meet someone, it's just all the time. And it's draining. And so I think that, the whole world is really a haunted house for women. And so how do you process that? How do you acknowledge that? I think just being aware of it and knowing that other women are feeling the same thing, and we're all sort of moving through mud a little bit because of it, has been really interesting. I thought that was something that I felt that I didn't realize that other women felt. And so I think just even having that conversation for me has actually been really affirming.
Well, and it's also important to point out, I mean, the series does not take place in modern day. It's set predominantly in the 90s. And I think that there's this false belief that this is just kind of a recent thing that we've been talking about. And the series really kind of showcases that it's always been that way. We just might not have had cell phones in order to like relay information quicker. How did you want to, I think with a lot of shows set in the past, there is a bit of a kind of a hindsight element. You want to be more contingent to a 2020 audience. Characters act more like maybe they did in the 2020s than they did in the 1990s. I don't feel that with this show. Was that a conscious decision? How did you look at, it's made in 2022 or 2021, but it's set in a time period where we weren't having these conversations?
Yeah, and that's very much in the book. In the book, there's different points of view from women from the 40s, the 20s, and it's really the same problem, right? So it's a cycles. How are these cycles of violence through all the different eras? The dresses might be different, but it's kind of the same story. And I mean, when I approached the 90s, I wasn't trying to translate. I don't think the dynamic is that different. I'm just going to be honest. I think, there's no iPhones, which made it much easier for plotting the mystery because they can't just Google things. The newsroom itself is probably the biggest thing that's different, which is what was print journalism then versus now. But in terms of the dynamic between Harper and a woman who lives in the 90s, or, how Kirby felt about walking down the street in the 90s versus now, I don't think there's that much difference.
Well, I love the casting of this series, again, to talk about stuff we're more cognizant of today. You have such a great multi-ethnic cast, Wagner and Philippa and, Elisabeth, even, the young woman playing Julia. It's such a great mix of amazing, amazing talents. Can you talk about the casting process? I know some creatives say, we weren't really contingent about wanting to make it, diverse in that way. Some say they were very aware of that. How did you look at the casting of this series?
So those concepts are built into the script. So I know before I go in, Dan Velasquez, that's my mother's maiden name. So he's Dominican in the book. There was a whole thing with Wagner where, we sort of debated back and forth. Is he going to be Dominican? Is he going to be Brazilian? We landed Brazilian, but all the characters are written as what they are. And so then we were looking for specific choices, because it feels like that, that is something in the 90s, what is it like to be a Black photographer at the Sun-Times? John White was a really big inspiration, but that's a really different experience than the majority white people working at the office at that time. That's just the reality. And so you have to sort of, when you're building out that character, you have to talk about, okay, well, what was that person's experience? Where did they grow up? Where did they, what is his worldview? All those things inform every scene. So I think you have to know going in before you start casting who that person is.
When you're wearing, go on. I don't know if I talked over you.
Some of them, so some of the characters are from the book also. So like Julia's from the book, Jinsuk is from the book, Dan is from the book. So there was already a huge depth of really interesting characters to bring to the surface.
Exactly. Well, and you're wearing so many hats with this series, EP and screenwriter. All of that. Is there an element that was harder for you on this series than any of the others, or one you preferred to the others?
I mean, I love writing, so always it's the thing I've done my whole life, and I love being in the writer's room. That part is always a very, it's special. It's when you're figuring out the show. It's very quiet, right? You don't have all this, like once production start, it's just emails and there's so much coming at you. Like you just are just trying to survive every single day. So, I mean, just what part do I enjoy living through the most is the writing. That's the dreaming part. I think, but at the same time, to be able to actually see how everything comes together and then see, people take your idea and they build on it. They make it better. They grow. How do they interpret it? What life experience are they bringing that, it becomes a snowball and it just turns into something else. And that process is pretty magical.
Well, you're not just writing, 8 episodes of something. You're also writing a series that is jumping back and forth in time. Kirby goes to one location and it's one way. She comes back and it's a completely different location. And yet, I know it would be easy to shoot things in different colors or shoot things in different styles so that there's a way to differentiate. How did you want to approach that in a way that keeps the audience aware of what is happening, but without kind of using the staid tropes I think we've come to utilize when we are going back and forth in time?
Yeah, that was something we talked a lot about, just in terms of production design and clothes, is because you're jumping around. So you have different time periods, but then you also have these shifts, right? So you have different versions of Kirby, after Harper has done something, she changes. If we had these massive changes every single time, it would just be so disorienting. There would be no cohesive look and texture to the show. So we had actually a pretty consistent color palette. It felt like there had to be a cohesiveness to everything so that when you had these changes, it wasn't completely jarring and you could stay with the characters and stay with the moment. And so instead of doing something like in time travel shows, it's like there's these crazy needle drops where it's like the music is like Britney Spears and then it's Bob Dylan. We try to stay away from that as much as possible and make the shifts actually a lot more subtle, a lot more subjective, things that wouldn't pull you out of the story. But I will say, production wise, tackling all of that was that was the most challenging part. It was fun because it was a puzzle, but we shot the whole season out of order. We had multiple directors working at the same time. We tried to shoot out locations just for efficiency. It was time travel plus shifts, plus mythology, plus COVID, plus just trying
Continuity.
to be continuity. I watch the episodes now and I'm like, it's a miracle.
Well, you bring up the COVID of it all. Watching this too, I think that there's audiences take it in differently because Kirby is isolated because of her past, but also, it's a show where as women, there is this element of isolation that we have just kind of moving through the world and trying to be unobserved. Can you talk a little bit about making a show like that in an era where isolation and COVID protocols and all of that are also tackling, the part and are integrated in the creative process?
It was such a strange writer's room because we started writing in February and then COVID started in March and then April. And we went through this very intense process where we all got to know each other because it was like, where are you finding beans? We were all stockpiling at the same time, trying to figure out if it was serious or not. It was just so intense. But I think that there was a kind of collective trauma that was happening. And we definitely didn't acknowledge it when we were writing it, but the feeling that the life that you had planned just changed from one moment to the next. And then the next week it completely changes again and again, that very much felt like something all the writers were going through because we were just living through it. And it only in retrospect, I was like, oh, that actually makes sense. But at the same time, by the time I got to set, I was just so grateful that obviously with COVID, so many shows weren't able to shoot. And, obviously we got delayed, and you're just hoping that this thing that everybody's worked so hard on can actually go. And so the fact that people were willing, it was early. So people were willing to leave their families and put masks on and still give so much to the show it was very emotional.
Exactly. Well, you talked about the radium dance, and talking about Harper's backstory that we got to see was so fascinating. Madeline Brewer has such a great moment in the episode. I mean, we know Kirby is our protagonist and she gets us from A to B, but to see the backstory, this kind of making of a murderer, if you will, type of thing, how and have it be, so late in the season. Can you talk a little bit about unveiling that backstory and going back to, this lack of glamorization for a person who feels all too real in this world?
Yeah, I think there's a balance to it, right? Because in the first half of the season, I saw really the show from Kirby's point of view, where Harper is like a shark. He's this threat. He's a mystery. You don't know fully what's going on with him. But at the same time, there's 8 hours. So you can't sustain that for that long. So you have to actually get into, who is he? Why does he do these things? What are the mechanics of the sci-fi parts of it? But you just need more access, because it becomes boring watching him without fleshing all that out for people. And then trying to figure out what kind of backstory felt right, where it wasn't, oh, I feel so sorry for this guy, that he has his own trauma, and like, how is he going to get through that? That was something we worked a lot in the writer's room, talking about what's the right calibration for where you can understand it, but you don't accept it. And there's other people that have gone through the same thing and didn't make those choices.
Is the book a guide for you in this instance, or was it all the writers kind of conjuring stuff up?
It was a blend of both.
Well, I'm curious too, as well, with the book. I mean, talking to you, watching the series, I feel horrible. I need to read the book. I'm going to, now that I've heard how wonderful it is. Is there an element from the book that you wish you could have gotten into this first season and just didn't work out?
I think it's all the other women. So seeing all the different time periods, I love period. And so like episode 6 is my favorite episode, because I love being in the 1920s. Like, I love all the World War Ones. Like, all that is just like, I could write 60s, 70s, anything but now. So I think that would have been fun to really, build out, sort of like figuring out, okay, how can they fold into the story? How can we, could we do more storylines like Julia? I think that probably would have been, because I think she had so many different kinds of women and so many different kinds of characters. That's probably what I miss most from the book.
Exactly. Well, I think that watching Elisabeth too, and Philippa, all of them, is just amazing to get to see them play off each other. Is there a collaborative element, with Elisabeth and the other actors, in terms of how they see their character versus how you see it, that ended up working in the series' favor?
Well, obviously with Elisabeth Moss, it's a completely different relationship, because she's an EP, she's a director. She came on very early. So I'd already written the pilot script, and she was the first actress we went to. But she came in before the writer's room. So she also became a touchstone that I could be like, okay, we've done another 3 episodes. This is how Kirby's shaping out. Let's talk about it. And just really a collaborator in building out what that arc is going to be. And then when she got on set, she actually, she'd walked the whole path with me. So she knew what the show was. She knew why we'd made certain choices. And so having an advocate like that on set that is in your head because they've been there the whole time, it was really, really helpful. You know, and so then as a director, when she directed Pippa, she was able to articulate all those things, like, you know, this is why the scene is shaped like this. This is what you're feeling here. All those things, she really had the whole season in her head. But of course, it's always, you know, I like to have as many conversations as possible with actors before you get to set, because once you're filming, it's obviously, you know, the pressure's on and you're just trying to make the days. So I think we got really lucky in the sense that all the actors, men, women, everybody was really, really invested, and they had done a lot of prep work. So they'd all came, you know, with thoughts, with ideas. They wanted to talk through scenes beforehand. Everyone was really connected to the material, that they weren't just showing up being like, what are we doing today? It was like, you know, they'd really thought about it and done research into the time period and like who they were. So it made my job really easy because they had their own point of view on it.
Well, I think I'm coming to the end of my time, and I wanted to throw out one last question. You know, there are so many amazing sequences in this series, whether it's any scene with Kirby and Harper kind of sparring, or just getting to see Wagner do his amazing performance. Is there a sequence that you remember that you were like, I don't know how I'm going to pull this off, or I'm happy we pulled it off? Is there something that sticks with you that's just like, wow, that is out there?
There's 2 scenes in the pilot where I remember filming it and being like, oh, thank God, it's going to work. And the one is the diner scene with Kirby and Dan. It was the first real scene that we shot with the 2 of them together. And they just had such good chemistry. Like, I love that scene. Like, I loved shooting it. I loved editing it. I could live in that scene forever. I think they're both phenomenal in it. And it's such a simple scene. You know, they're just talking, and they're both just so good in it. But once I saw the chemistry, which you just don't really know, I was like, okay, it's fun to watch them. And I understand what the show is, right? It's her opening up slowly, him finding a way to get it out of her, and it will build from there. The other one in the pilot is the medical examiner scene, which I think Michelle McLaren, our pilot director, did such a fantastic job with. Great. It's so great. And it's something where you can write it, but it's entirely director driven. Like, how does she put you in Kirby's point of view? How is she going to handle the shift? It's not necessarily a classic horror scene, right? Like, there's nothing really happens. So it's just the disorientation that is scary. And that means that Michelle has very little, like, it's all her, it's all camera. And when I saw that like cut for the first time, I was like, oh, yes. I was like, she's so good. And Lizzie's so good in it. Like, like the scene is emotional, and then it's really disorienting. So those 2, I was like, okay, we've set ourselves up for success because this works.
Exactly. Silka, it is so great to get to talk to you about this great show. If you have not watched Shining Girls, you can do it on Apple TV Plus. It's so much fun and insightful. So thank you so much for taking time to talk to me.
Thank you. Nice meeting you.